Help if I turn my microphone on there. Good morning, guys. So good to be back. Good to see everybody here. Not a terrifically exciting stream today, but there will be some alligator involved, so I guess maybe it will be exciting. We'll see. I didn't stream last week. I was busy working on that ivory and ring lizard wallet. I generally, when I'm working on things that I'm kind of trying to focus on or things I want to move quickly on, I try not to stream. So I can't be getting into the busy season now. I can't say that I'll be streaming every Monday like I was during the summer, but I'll try to keep up on it. So if I miss a week or two, I'm probably just busy and trying to work through a couple things. But today I'm working on this here. So this is a Whiskey Delaro interior. Unusual decision on this one. Whiskey Delaro and Irish Blue glazed alligator 8-slot bifold. Now, why did we go with Delaro versus something else? That's not usually what I end up using on exotic wallets. This customer in particular told me up front that he's very hard on his wallets, and he was concerned about ordering something, dropping a good amount of money on something, and then, in his daily use of it, destroying it just because like I said, he's particularly rough on them. And so we went back and forth a little bit. We, kind of found out what textures and colors he liked, and we settled on Delaro because it was number one. It was the color that he liked. He liked that whiskey color. The texture he liked, and it is particularly one of the denser and stiffer leathers. So that that means it usually resists wear pretty well. It's quite a durable leather. Delaro, if you're unfamiliar, is basically it is the sister tannage to Botero. It's actually the same tannage, but when they finish it, they take it and they stamp this texture on it. And that stamping further compresses the fibers down, and you get a very dense, very fibrous leather out of it. So it's actually one of my favorites to work with, and ideally suited for this particular use. It's very, very durable and still looks nice, especially when you arrange it all together like this. If you're working with Delaro, you have to be careful. There is a grain pattern to it. Although this looks like it is a more or less random and amorphous pattern, there is a grain to it, and it runs, in this case, horizontally. So if I took one of these pieces and rotated it 90 degrees, you would immediately notice that the pattern does not line up. Actually, I have a piece here. So this here is running vertically, and this here is running horizontally. And you can see right where they meet there that it is pretty much instantly noticeable when they're next to each other like that. So if you're working with it, keep that in mind. Let me adjust the project as we're working on today. There we go. That'll fit. Wonderful. So, trying to think if I had anything else I was going to talk about here before we got into it. I don't think I did. Nope, nothing comes to mind. So, without further ado, Irish Blue Alligator is one of those gators that I try to keep in stock all the time because it is one of my favorites and one of my more popular color choices. But actually, at this point, I had so many requests for it, I was out of it, so I had to order a new one for this order. And I managed to get, Jenny had one for me. It's a nice 29 centimeter, so on the smaller side, but I quite like that. And a grade 1, too. They list it as Blue Iris on the label, but is listed on the website as Irish Blue. So it's kind of an oddball one if you're looking for it on Antan's storefront. But one of their best colors, in my opinion. Oh yeah, that is. Ah, look at that. Now that's gorgeous. That is a beautiful, beautiful hide. And like I said, somewhat on the smaller side. I normally am working with around 30 to 34 centimeter, but 26 to 29 is also fine for me. Because I like getting into these smaller flank scales on the sides there. People seem to like it when I do that, and I certainly am a fan of it myself. I don't mind these smaller hides at all. I think they lend themselves very nicely to the way I put them together. So we're looking at it right here. Here's my exterior template. And again, these are transparent acrylic, so I get to lay them right over top of it and see how the pieces are going to look. So we've got that's a nice arrangement right there. When you're doing alligator scales, generally what you want to do you want to avoid having it terminate on one of these scale transitions. So you want to avoid it here because these are softer parts of it. You generally want to have your edge ideally in the center of one of these scale sections here, because it's denser, it's firmer, it will stitch better, skive better, and crease better. These here, what you'll end up with is these stitches will kind of sink in, and you'll get an awkward looking stitch there, and it'll be much softer than the rest of it, so you'll have difficulty painting, difficulty creasing, just trouble all around. Here. Happy with that. Let me double check and make sure I'm using the right. Yep, that is the correct template. That's the one. And what we're going to do, that's such a good fit, I don't know if I want to even bother drawing on it. I think I might just cut it. As I say, every time I do this, no matter how many times I do this, I remain nervous every single time. Let's see here. Take my time, double check, make sure I like the positioning of it. Double check again. Yes, that is the right piece. That is the right template. Start. Take the head off first. One thing you need to be aware of around here, you can see I had to cut around one of the little bones from the exterior of the hide there. Those are just too tough to cut through in most cases. Great way to ruin your knife. Put this back. Hang on, I'm gonna adjust my camera here. You can see I've got I hung a little bird feeder out there, and I have a bunch of sparrows that sit and occupy the bush in the front of my yard, and Sparrow likes to sit and watch them. Sometimes Demo will come out too, but he's got some nice cat TV right there that he really enjoys. In fact, I think I will open the window for him because it's really nice today. We're having some, I hesitate to say unseasonably nice weather for fall here. We've been out on my father-in-law's fishing boat yesterday out on Mosquito Lake, which is possibly the worst name for a lake anybody's ever come up with. I'm still astonished that somebody actually chose that name for it. It must have been horrible when they named it. They couldn't name it Nice or Pleasant Lake, but no, it's Mosquito Lake. But it is a really nice lake to boat on and fish on, so we had a wonderful time out there. Probably gonna have to, either today or tomorrow after the stream, maybe I'm gonna have to go and stow my Lincoln. Having closed the paint shop, I no longer have access to, heated and shielded storage in the wintertime. So this will be its first time sitting out in my driveway all winter. So I've got to wrap it up and stow it, and I'm just trying to decide the best way to do that. I have been, as a painter, I have been vehemently anti-car cover for my whole life, so I've got to figure out how I want to go about doing that. I may just wrap up the vinyl top and leave the rest of it to the elements, just because I don't like trapping moisture or things here under tarps and covers. I don't know yet. I haven't quite figured out what I'm gonna do with that yet. Yeah, I imagine you guys probably don't get too much rain down there. We get our share of it up here. Well, that's enough cat television. I guess back to work. So, we have this will be our wallet back. I'm gonna trim this a little bit more here, and like I always say, we're gonna keep these flank pieces because these are important. These serve an important role. Because when we go to skive that, we're actually going to get to practice on something first. We do want to skive it. Not too much, just a little bit. Not very much at all, actually. This was one advantage of this being a nice, smaller alligator hide is that it's quite thin already on the edges. Some of the larger hides you get almost a 1/16 of an inch thick at the edges there, which is pretty significant. Wow, what a beautiful wallet bag. Look at that. Look at the reflections on that. Wow, that's going to be pretty. I hated cutting it, but I sure do like seeing it here in its almost final form. I've already got the interior back cut for it. Fit together, that looks quite good. That's a little wavy here. It'll flatten out when we glue it down to its interior. Now, one other advantage of using Delaro for this construction versus something else is that if you've watched my streams before, you've noticed that when I do alligator backs, usually I'm doing it with something soft like goat skin or something like that, and I glue the goat skin to a piece of salpa or salamander, which is bonded leather stiffener. There's no need to do that here. I can just take the Delaro and glue it directly to the alligator because it is naturally stiff enough to support itself. It will hold its shape. It requires no stiffener. So there's one less layer there, which is a little extra, or a little less thickness to account for at the edge, which is quite nice. And I'm looking at this, I'm debating if I want to skive it at all. I do want to skive it. I could get away without doing it, but I'm going to skive it just a hair. A little bit here. So give me a moment. Let me set up the external camera here. Hold on. I'll move it over to the bell skiver here. Let me plug it in here. A little unprepared for the stream today, again, just because I stopped doing it for a single week is all it takes to forget how to do everything. But well, you can't see it from a nice angle of the stream, but computer is just an unholy mess of wires and cables and God knows what else back there. Let's see if this works. No, hold on. There we go. All right. So there's the Skiver camera. Let's get it a little better there. I think that's about as close as we can get it there. So again, we're going to take, you can see I've got a couple from the last project here, but we're going to take our leftover pieces here and run it through the bell skiver and see how well that works. Before I do that, I'm going to clean out the bell real quick. Go. The bell feels decently sharp, but I think I'm going to run it through the sharpener real quick just to be on the safe side because it costs us nothing. go. Turn the speed up and engage the sharpening wheel. It's already on. I like to just walk the sharpening stone off slowly. That should be pretty good. Alright, now we're going to take our piece. Here's the comparison. Let's see how it looks after we run it through. As you can see, a little bit of that color differentiation getting into that outer skin there is where skive has been done. I think that's all that really needs. That took it down. That maybe only took not even a half a millimeter off, but it'd be enough to matter. Just enough to matter. We don't need to go too crazy. There's a little bit. Again, you can just see the lightness of color there. That's all we took off. We're not taking a bunch off. There. And I think, let me get my piece here. I think I will quick skive across the top, but I'm going to skive the Delaro. Rather than do a big long skive across the top of my Alligator, play it safe and skive the top of my Delaro here. Go there. That's a-okay. And I think that's all it needs. That should be all the skiving we have to do today. Here's our interior piece, and we've skived it on 3 out of 4 edges. I've not skived the bottom. Here's the back of our Alligator. We've skived it on 2 out of 4 edges, just the 2 sides. And I've done that. Why? My particular bifold design has the bottom of the interior floating freely. It does not get stitched across the bottom. And I like doing it that way. I think it looks nicer. I think it's nicer the way it folds and opens. I like the way that fits together. But what that means is we're much thinner at the bottom than we are up here. So in interests of keeping it somewhat consistent at the edge, I don't skive the bottom because I actually want to build up some extra thickness down there. Same here, and across the top, I want it to be somewhat thick as well, so I can get a clean stitch line as well. We don't need it to be super, super thick, but a little bit thick out there. So I didn't skive both edges of this, just the one. Really, the only place I'm actually trying to save as much thickness as I can is at the sides. So I've skived the sides of both of these pieces here to shave out as much thickness as I can there, and I'm being careful to leave thickness in certain places where I do want it. I think there is oftentimes a fetish for getting things as thin as possible with leather, which is not always the best approach for it. You want to keep some thickness there because, number one, you want to be able to have a nice stitch line, which gets thicker, more difficult and difficult as things get less and less thick. And you also want the wallet to be able to remain together. You don't want it to blow apart because you have to remember you're using a natural material. This is not nylon or ripstop tape. This is all fibrous leather, so it can stretch and it can rip if you don't leave enough to be strong. And again, that was a concern with this particular wallet, so we want to make sure that this has enough strength where it needs it. Jeff, this is Amtan Gator. This is I've cut the piece here, but that is Amtan's Irish Blue, which is one of my favorites of theirs. Either Irish Blue or Blue Iris, depending on how it's listed on their website. But that's one of my favorites there. Here. Move the oblique camera out of here. unplug the mobile camera just because it tends to get warm. So with that all cut, we have our pieces sized and ready to go. It's time to actually glue them together. Quick test fit here first. That's good. Start gluing about okay. One of the nice things about working with Delaro on an Alligator wallet is that I don't have to worry about fighting with the contact glue. I get to use my preferred glue, the Sewa water-based glue, which is a PVA glue, basically Elmer's. And I find that I like this glue more than any other glue. This is my preferred glue to work with. And I'm just going to glue down one corner of it, effectively as an anchor. Okay. Well, I've done there. I have glued myself an anchored position down here, so I can kind of work in stages and get this worked around because it has to be glued on a 90-degree fold. So it's kind of awkward to work around it and a little difficult to do all at once. One other reason I do this on Delaro in particular is because it can sometimes be a thirsty leather. Glue will dry very quickly applied to the back of it there, so I don't necessarily want to do this entire glue run in one go. It's better for me if I do it in a couple stages of it. I'm going to basically go just shy of the center here. You'll note I'm only putting glue on the outside edges there. If you haven't seen me do this before, basically what I'm doing is I'm doing a free-floating wallet back. Why am I doing that? With the glazed Alligator in particular, when it flexes, it can wrinkle, and that is not an attractive use of this leather, so you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And the best way to do that is to let the Alligator flex freely, flex how it naturally wants to. And that oftentimes is against where it needs to go, for the purposes of the wallet. So this way, what we're effectively doing is the Alligator is almost a sort of veneer. The structure of the wallet is actually taken up by that interior part, by that piece of Delaro. And that really is what holds the wallet together. And the Alligator on the outside just kind of flexes and moves freely, and that lets it move the way it needs to avoid unwanted wrinkles or otherwise distortion. No, Jeff, this is just a small piece. So it's actually not split, it's just a particularly smaller hide, and being as it's glazed, it's compressed as well. So it's pretty thin to begin with, just by nature, actually. But it is not pre-split. It's a grade 1-2, so it's also very clean on the back, so it's quite a nice piece. It's not very hairy or fibrous. It's a really, really nice Alligator. We've got that glued there. We're going to do our center fold right here. It's always the trickiest one. And this is generally where I end up getting a little bit messy, just because I am trying to work a lot of glue in there until it comes out the edges, basically. That always looks a little untoward. As I say, anytime I do this, it is an inelegant process, but an elegant solution to the problem. Trying to avoid getting glue all over my fingers, but I'm not always successful. Of course, of working that down fully, I'll take getting a little bit of glue in places if it means I ensure that I get a very, very good glue bond. And the nice thing about it being water-based glue is it just wipes right up with just a little bit of water. You do not want to get glazed alligator truly wet because you'll undo the finish on it, but just a little bit of moisture just across the top like that just to remove a bit of glue doesn't hurt it a bit. There. That should be should. Yep. So there you can see that naturally wants to rest on the 90 degree, which will further mitigate any additional wrinkling or crinkling, things like that. Last edge of it here. So, put it. Last slicker, there it is. There we go. Looking good. And then after we finish this, once this glue is set, we're going to give this a quick polish. Just to clean it off a little bit as we go. But there is the rough form of our wallet back. It's a little hard to note. You can see it kind of lift in the center there. That's what we want. That's what shows us that our back is flexing independently of the interior. It's not quite as pronounced and easy to see with glaze just because it is so stiff. But you would definitely notice if you didn't do it. If you just glued this all fully down, you would very, very quickly see where it was wrinkling. So the fact that you can't tell much difference is exactly what we want. Good enough to go ahead and hit with some polish now. I might have enough left on naturally in my brush. Oh, good. Go ahead. Now you're always going to get some wrinkling at these top parts here, because that's again where it's glued down. You're always going to fight that a little bit, but having just a little bit at the top and the bottom is far preferable to having a whole mess load of it here in the center, which is what we don't want. So now, funnily enough, ironically enough, we have to flatten it out so that we can trim it. And I've come around to just doing this holding the template directly over, just trimming it right up against the template, I find seems to work best for me. Not trying to cut it in one go, just kind of letting the knife do what it naturally does at its own pace. I find that if I try to work the knife too hard, more risk of slipping. Which obviously at this point would be catastrophic. So I'm content to just make multiple passes. Oh, there. Now that's cut to true final size. And again, even after pressing it flat like that, even after counteracting the curve, you can note in the center there, we still have no wrinkling or ugliness there. Only those teeny tiny little ones at the edges there. And then once we stitch through that, those are going to become even less noticeable. Now we have to stitch this to the top, or rather, to word that properly, we have to stitch the top of this. We want that to line up with the stitches we have on the inside here. It's a little hard to notice the texture of the Delaro when it catches the light. It's hard to notice the stitches there because they're so dark, but you can see them there. We want these points to line up. Let's see here. Check. Top, bottom. Very good. There's a very easy way of doing that. Take needles here. I'm just going to take it and lay the interior on top of it. Line up that edge there, make sure everything is as we want it. It is. I'm just going to take my needle, poke it. Through the stitch hole down into the piece there, and it's a little hard to spot, so I'm going to, well, I can see it easily, fill it in with a little white dot there. I'm going to do the same on the other side. And that way I know that no matter what, for this to line up, I have to have my stitch, my first stitch hole, starting there. That is where the stitch hole must begin, and when I put them together, they will line up. The length and shape of this stitch line is meaningless compared to this. It could be whatever I want it to be. If I want to do a Western style curve and have it come down and make a little star point down here, I can do whatever I want as long as it starts and ends at those points there. Mark the other one. And I know that no matter what, as long as it does that, it's going to line up with this interior stitch line. Here. Perfect. You can see them there. There's our two marks there on the top left and top right corners. That indicates to us where our stitches need to be. Next step for that will be to round the corners to match. Once again, I'm going to lay this on top of it here just to kind of get a good idea. Here, right. Right. Perfect. following the marks we just made. Punch some holes in it. There we go. Switch over and start punching from the other side because I want to meet in the middle. I have to fudge the stitches a little bit to make them fit. That way I have, I'm doing it on a point that is not necessarily noticeable. If you have a longer or shorter stitch, it's harder to notice when it's right on the peak of the fold there. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, you just have a little bit of variance with placement and positioning of it. In this case, we have a teeny tiny little bit. We're going to end up with one, maybe two stitches that are somewhat longer than the others, but very, very hard to notice. But just managed to get it to fit. Worked just fine. There we go. Perfect. Actually, no fudging required. Everything fit just right. Hammer those down. Only where I need to, Tom. So, for the height of the card slots, I do. Those are always very, very strictly measured. And everywhere else, I try to get as close as I can, but I know that over distances like this, there's always going to be a little bit of variance, so no matter how much you measure in Inkscape or Illustrator or whatever you do, there's always going to be some degree of variance when you actually cut the leather. So I find that worrying too much about measuring all that out over super long runs, I think is wasted time. It really, you have to know where it matters, and to me it matters here, at the spacing of the card slots. That's where it is really critical. But everywhere else is long enough to where not only is it easy to fudge, you'll probably have to fudge whether you want to or not. So I just let it go that way. In this case, everything worked out just right and there was no need to. Four times the length of the stitch line, plus a little bit extra just to be sure. Needles from before. stitch across the top line here. When we lay these two pieces together, that stitch line should match perfectly. Little spot that needs more glue. That one spot, everything else looks just perfect. After this, we're going to have to paint this edge. And I have discovered a nice little trick. I was going to invest in one of the Mr. Dry booths. Either invest in one or try to build one myself. But I recently acquired a new shop heater, little Duraflame convection infrared heaters. And I discovered, much to my delight, that the convection on the bottom, it blowing the heated air out through the bottom, is effectively turns it into a perfect drying booth. So all I have to do is stick something down there underneath where that airflow is coming out, and it dries it within 2-3 minutes, from a full bead of paint to workable. One of the great misconceptions about paint drying, or curing, actually is the better term of it, is that heat is what does it. Heat can accelerate a cure, but it is not what cures it. It's actually airflow over the surface that does the curing. Warm air is better than cold air, but at the end of the day, it is the air that does that. Access to that airflow, really what cures paint. In this case, I have airflow and heat. Dries very quickly. I'm glad that worked for you, Jeff. I hope that was helpful to you. It's it can be a little tricky to figure that out, but then once you see it, it's actually very simple to do. And you can use that for all different sorts of stitch runs. I think they just look so much nicer with a contiguous stitch. So I'm glad that was helpful to you. That makes me happy to hear. I appreciate you telling me. As always, if there are any questions about anything I've done up to this point, please do ask. I think what I'm going to do here, I think I'll get this stitched, and then we'll take a 3 to 5 minute break here. I'm going to grab a cup of tea, hit the head, and we'll come back and paint this top edge. And then we'll get ready to join the outer to the inner. By that point, doggone it, we'll have a proper honest-to-God wallet built. Like I said earlier in the stream, if you joined late, I did miss a stream last week. I apologize for that. So these weeks, I'm actually starting to get quite a few orders in. Thank you, I appreciate that. But streaming does slow me down a little bit. You notice today I'm talking less and working a little quicker. I'm just trying to keep on top of the orders for Christmas here so that I don't get buried. So I may deviate from my weekly stream schedule here. It may be every other week, but I will try to keep doing it, if not as frequently, still somewhat regularly here. I went pretty hard over the past 2 or 3 weeks. I actually took a couple days off last week to kind of recuperate and rest. Hello, Vanessa. And as I said, either later today or tomorrow, I'm going to take advantage of these last couple warm days and try to wrap up my car. I'm not keen on the idea of it spending a winter outside, but I think it'll be all right. You just Yeah, that can be a little tricky if you're not familiar with it, but really the only way to get good at that is to practice it. Keep doing it. You'll start to get a feel for the technique for it. Learning how to use your fingertips and your fingernails to position the thread is very helpful. Getting your nail right up to that to where that thread's coming out and pushing it up or down and holding it in place while you tension it really does make a big amount of difference on that. So don't be afraid to use a needle, use your fingernail, and hold that thread where it needs to go. Because you have to remember, when you're doing it with just a running stitch like that, you lose the benefit of the other thread holding it in place. It has nothing. So you have to really force it to go where you want it to go. And that tension that it would normally get, internally inside the stitch hole from the other piece of thread, that is gone. So you have to provide it externally, either with a needle or your awl or your finger or whatever. But whatever holds that thread in place for you, do what you got to do. And then once it's tensioned down, it should remain there. But that's another reason why I like to hammer my stitch holes before and after. And getting them closed up just a little bit more is helpful for that. You get a little added tension inside that stitch hole. It makes a significant difference. I find myself looking forward to winter for the first time. I always dreaded it, paint shop, just because it was bitterly cold up there. I would come home and my feet would just be completely frozen. That's not even taking into account, if I had to go outside and do an estimate or work in the back or something like that. But I'm looking forward to being here in my workshop during the winter. I'm eagerly waiting the first snow. Again, it's something I always turned my stomach before, and now I think it'll actually be nice. I think with this new heater, I should be very comfortable here. Almost to the end here. Or rather, we're almost to the end of this stitch run. Okay. Still have more work to do. Just about there. That the end of the saddle stitch. Now to do the hidden back stitch. Dropping one of my needles. Doing single running stitch. Notice here, not only am I using my thumb to hold the thread in place, doing exaggerated up and down movements to really pull that thread in the direction it needs to go. Because again, it doesn't have the other thread to help position it. You have to do that for it. And that is an art form that takes a hot minute to really figure out. But once you do, the capability it offers you to basically start and end the stitch anywhere you want, more or less invisibly. So I need not exaggerate the utility of that. Then, as I always do, I glue the ends of my thread. So while that glue is still setting, I'm going to take my hammer. I want to close up those stitch holes while that glue is liquid. There we go. Just right. That looks just right. So now, since the cats are out here, I'm going to quickly put away my needles and thread. Try to police those up as quickly as I can. And I think we're going to take a quick break here for a few minutes, but I'm not going to put the be right back message on. I'm going to turn the camera back, and I'll let you watch the bird feeder for a minute here. And you can't see him, but right on the chair there, right there behind the fileteau says Sparrow. So my guess is he'll probably pop back up and make an appearance there. So I'm going to turn the microphone off. I'll be back in about a minute or two. Like I said, I'm just going to fix a cup of tea and hit the head, and then we'll pick this back up. We're going to crease that edge, and then we'll get some paint on it, and then we'll have our outer done and ready to go. So I'll be right back. Birds. Big fat boy. All right. See that Sparrow's shift has ended and Dima's back. All right. Now back to work. All right, I've got my tea. Check the chat real quick. Hey, Jeff, whatever works for you. If that's holding it for you, then, you know, far be it from me to tell you otherwise. That's one of the nice things about leatherworking is that there are many different ways to do things. And oh, hang on, wait. Got both of them out here now. Couldn't resist. Couldn't keep away, could you? Leave your brother some space. Tail swish. Look at that bad tail. Look, you can tell he's up to something. Hey, Sand. I didn't even see you here. Welcome to the chat. All right. So where we left off, Phil Tucson. Where we left off, we had just finished stitching the top edge of our exterior here. Now we need to crease it, paint it. But while we wait for the fill to warm up, one other thing we can do in between, you'll note I have the bottom edge of this marked, but not trimmed yet. And I just mark it to kind of have an idea where that needs to be, but I don't actually trim them until I have the exterior done. Because as I mentioned before, there's always some degree of variance, despite your best laid plans. So I never actually cut this until I have the exterior to lay right up on top of it and make sure that, yep, it is this size, it is going to fit, this is the final trimmed dimension that it needs to be. We're going to take this, lay that over top of it, just lining it up with the top edge there. Take white gel pen here. Go, so there's our line there, and I'm going to double check it from the other side too, just to be safe. Yep, that looks good. So this is actually going to be the line I trim from, and what we're going to do, we're going to trim this, and just for a good little thought experiment here, I'm going to trim from this line. I'm going to see how close it comes to these original lines I later, just to kind of show the difference in final dimensions that you can get, even despite, you know, number one, having measured very carefully, and number two, having made a great many of these. I have made easily 100 of these wallets by now, so I know how they go together. So we'll see how close I am, how close I got to my own initial measurements here. And straight. That looks. Got them trimmed off that. And it looks like I was pretty much spot on. There's the top edge from the front, from the back. Looks like my measurements were just about perfect. I don't like to, Tom, because the reason I do that is I punch the interior separately from the exterior. I don't like to glue them and then punch through them, just because it's extra thickness to try to punch through. I find that I get a cleaner stitch by punching them separately, and it's difficult to do when they're glued together. Oh, that mint tea is good. That mint tea soothes the throat. We'll set that aside. Our fileteuse is warmed up by now. That interior line creased, because now I know that that is lined up the way it needs to be. You have to be a little careful doing this with even with Delaro, because it is at the end of the day still basically Botero. It is veg tan, so it can burn easily if you're not careful. You have to run at the right heat. You have to keep that tip moving. I don't want to linger too much in one spot. Overdo the exterior. Dabs of glue stuck on the outside there. It'll just come off. Back over the side again real quick just to darken that up some more. Here we go. We are ready to begin painting. There's our... You can just catch the crease in the light there. Just along that top edge there. It always amazes me how much that adds to the final appearance of something. I think I'm going to plug the mobile camera in again. Shows two goofballs. Here, wait. No, I can't get a good position on them. Never mind. Thought I might be able to move the camera over and focus it on the cats, but not enough cord length. So with that creasing done, we're ready to dress this top edge here. I'm going to go over it quickly with my sanding block. Whenever you crease something, especially veg tan or things like that, it tends to compress the fibers quite a bit, and you can get a smoother edge than you really would want to put paint on. So I like to scuff it up, smooth it out just a little bit, rough it up, and get a better surface to adhere paint with. Now, something like this here, this edge is thin enough to where I think I'll use the roller. I debated finger painting it, but I think I'll be nice for the camera today and try using the paint roller. This first coat of paint, we're not really looking to build up very much. Don't scrape the window. Hey, you cannot get that bird. good way to think of this first layer is almost to think of it as sort of a primer coat. We're not really looking to get a lot of buildup. We're just looking to get a coat of paint on there that we can then heat smooth and melt into the fibers. Always keep your damp towel around in case you drip something. The easiest time to clean up paint is immediately after you've applied it. There. Say what you want about the roller, it does work well for thin edges. It does produce a pretty crisp line there. Nothing going over the edge, nothing ran. We're just going to let that dry for a second. Doesn't take long. Just about there. Take a look at our edge here. Our paint is pretty much dry. There's no more really wet spots on there. Just one or two, but those will dry up pretty quickly here. And our paint has soaked into the softer parts. There's a couple little gaps between the two layers that it has soaked into and kind of shrunk that are visible. But that doesn't matter. We've got our filetteuse nice and hot, so we're going to go over it with terrific heat. Very hot, around 400 or 500 degrees. And this heat will actually reactivate the paint just enough to spread it and melt it effectively into those fibers. And that becomes our base layer of paint. That becomes a nice hard layer that can be sanded for adhesion, and it's melted into the fibers, so as long as you bond to that edge of paint, it is going to bond to the leather. This filetteuse method is a great way to fill low spots or surface defects, things like that. Oh. Run it back over on the 45s to kind of roll that back up into the middle and spread it back out. Because when you're heat spreading it, you are spreading it. It does flow to the sides. If you feel it with your fingers, you'll have a bit of a kind of a hard edge there. You want to roll that back over. And now, despite having just heated it and smoothed it, we are going to sand it again. Not really trying to get it, and not really trying to take out defects, mostly, again, for paint adhesion. We're sanding to scuff, we're sanding to grip. There, so that feels good. Take my damp cloth, tack that edge off. Tacking refers to the act of removing dust or contaminants or things like that. Just a little bit of moisture is all you need to lift most of that off there. Now, that's our first layer of paint. Now we want to actually start building paint. And edge painting is similar to if you've ever done body work. Those of you who have worked on cars or done body work. If you've worked with Bondo or plastic filler, that's all edge painting is. It's flexible filler is basically it. You want to add more paint than you need so that you can then sand it down to the shape it needs to be. So we want to build as much as we can up on this surface now. To do that, I'm going to switch to just my scratch awl here. Dip into the paint, get a nice bead on there. I'm going to spread that bead out along the edge. Now this here you really need to pay attention to. You need to actually look at your edge after doing that. Because unlike the mesh roller, there's nothing preventing it from rolling over the edge and dripping. This comes down to purely your control of it. This is one of the few cases where a thicker edge is actually easier than a thinner edge. Thicker edge is a little more forgiving with the amount of paint you can build up before it rolls over. On a thin edge, it's a very, very fine line to walk between beading the paint and running the paint. So far, so good. Good. Give a look to the edges, make sure nothing's run off. It has. All right. There's our bead of paint. Hello, Hilo. Welcome aboard. This is Uniter's paint from Rocky Mountain Leather. This is the marine color of paint. We're going to go ahead and accelerate this dry. And like I said, we're going to put this in front of the convection of my heater down here. And within about 2 minutes, dry, workable. Start the timer now. Put on the phone here. Give that 2 minutes. Oh, he's here for the long haul. He's here to watch. Look at him, he's getting comfortable. Got a minute to go on our dry. Nothing so soothing as a good cup of mint tea. Not the same kind of hit as coffee, it's different. Coffee is soothing in a different way. This is just relaxing. $40 left to go on the dry. There you go. All right. That is almost completely dry to the touch. I think I'm going to give it another minute. Give it just one more minute there. That'll really cure it up. Then what we'll do, I'm going to hit that with the fileteuse, which will be somewhat messy. It will bring a lot of the solvents that are down low up high, and it'll pop through, and it'll take some sanding. But it'll further spread that bead of paint out and further dome the shape of it. And then one more layer on top of that should be good. I like watching the sparrows go crazy before wintertime. They're sitting in my wife's rose bush and they're all fat. And the rose bush leaves, rose bush branches are sagging under the weight of these little fat birds. Very nice to watch. Sparrow obviously enjoys it too. Okay. There we go. That looks good. Now, if you look up at the top there, you can see some waviness, lumpiness, things like that, where there was just a little bit more paint in that spot than there was in the rest of it. That's okay. Not a problem. It'll be all right. Like I said, we're gonna heat spread this edge again. And like I said, this is going to be a little messy. Whenever you're doing it over multiple layers of paint, like I said, you usually create what is called solvent popping, where solvents that are underneath are suddenly reactivated, they get heated up, and they want to flow to the surface to be carried away. And they're doing that through paint that is already thickened up. So the only option for it is to come up and pop. It creates a bubble like a crater. So you'll see a bit of that happen. Nothing that we can't fix or go over, because like I said, again, we're gonna heat spread this layer, and then we're gonna do another thick layer over top of it that will fill any of that stuff and let us sand it smooth and have a nice clean looking layer there. Now, because we accelerated this cure so much with the heat and with the airflow, we're not getting an excessive amount of solvent popping from this. Actually flowing pretty nicely, which tells me that it was actually fairly well cured under there. Let's see if you can just barely see those duller spots. Those are areas where we got a little bit of roughness, where there's a little bit of bubbling that came up through. But not as much as I feared. I expected there to be more solvent popping than there actually is. We might not have to do another coat over this. We might be able to just sand this and do a finish coat. We'll see. This side is really nicely cured. We're just going over this, just taking those high spots that you saw, spreading them. Spreading them out, flattening them. Oh, that looks a lot smoother, less lumpy, which is exactly what we wanted. Feels good. Feels nice and smooth. We're going to take our sanding block, really smooth that down. Obviously, anytime you've got sandpaper near glazed alligator, you want to exercise a certain degree of care. Ask me how I know. But you would be surprised, actually, what can be salvaged. That's good. Feels good. And we're going to take just a lightly damp paper towel and tack this edge off. Look on there, that line right there. That's all the dust we took off that edge. That would have been in the next coat of paint. Now it is not. Good, I'm actually pretty pleased with that. I don't think we actually even need to do another heavy coat. I think we can get away with just a top coat on that. Take this and just a little bit on my fingertip. Not very much at all. With the top coat or finish coat, we're not trying to build anymore. Just trying to get consistent color coverage. Kept very, very thin. Do one more for good measure. Spreading that out with my fingertip over that top edge. Good. So Mike, I generally sand in a couple different directions. It depends on what I'm trying to do. If I have, for example, a high spot that I'm trying to take down, an aggressive one, or I'm trying to take out a low spot, where I really need to cut, I need the sandpaper to aggressively cut, I'll sand perpendicular to it, because that will actually maximize the cut of the sandpaper. In this case, the edge was pretty smooth already. I really wasn't trying to do much cutting, much reduction of height. So I was able to just kind of run it along, parallel to it. Not really worry too much about it. So it's a case-by-case basis depending on what it is I'm doing. Most of the time I'll be sanding perpendicular because I'll be getting ready for a burnish or, again, trying to true up an edge. I wasn't really doing either in this case, so I was able just to follow the line of the edge there. I'm going to drop this in front of the here again, just for a minute, just to really cure that up. Timer. Try to clean some of the paint off my fingertips here. Not to worry, that'll come off in just a minute. Actually, I realize I still have to do this edge too. I only got one heavy coat on it, so I do need to do this one next too. Put things away a little preemptively there. So looking down this one here, let's take a look. This edge is pretty good. Already heat spread this one out. Again, same kind of thing. I'm just going to kind of go following the edge of it. And if anything, I'm actually kind of working on a diagonal. That kind of gives me the best of both worlds. I get a good cut, but I'm also following the shape of that edge there. Go. Tack that again. And that's how much, that little streak there is how much dust we took off from that. I think that's good enough to put a top coat on. We'll go ahead and fill over. That's good. And the purpose of this coat is not to build or to fill. We're mostly just looking to cover areas where we sanded through, areas where we may have sanded into the grain and lightened it up quite a bit. We want to make sure that we're getting all that covered. We now are. Good. That there is such a light coat, I'm just going to let that dry on its own. Now what we're going to do, this is a very important step, we're going to dry buff this. This is just a dry cloth. And dry means no wax in it, no other additives, nothing. It's just dry canvas. We want that friction. We want to build up just a little bit of heat. Not enough to really lift or damage the paint, but just a little bit of heat and friction to smooth it. So any little nibs or things like that that may have been left over in that final top coat, they'll come out with this. This will smooth that out, give us a nice consistent finish. Pretty good. I'm going to really get some more friction on it there. I just get a better grip on it here. And if you try that, if you run your fingertip over it before and after, you will feel quite a difference that dry buffing does. It really smooths it. We're getting to that here in a second, Tom. I'll show you. Here's the one we just did. We're going to go over it again with the dry cloth. And I'm being pretty aggressive with this. I'm putting a lot of tension, a lot of friction on it. I'm actually putting enough on here to where I've actually gone through a little bit. So I'll need to put another top coat over top of this. That's okay. That doesn't matter. Because this cloth is dry, it doesn't have any wax or things like that, we can actually scuff this right back up and go right back over top of it. We have not harmed our edge in any way. I'm actually going to go to 1500. I go to a pretty high grit here. A couple swipes there. Not much needed. Go back over, put another top coat on this. Giving it a look while I do that to make sure I haven't spilled over. I have not. Everything's good. It's clean edge in there. So, let that dry up for a second. It's here. I think I'm going to hit this with, I think I'm going to do the same for this one. I think I'm going to hit this with a little bit of 1500. I don't think I need to put another coat on it. I think I can just buff that right back. That gives us a very, very clean, very smooth edge. There, now this is dry enough to where I can buff this again. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Now, if this wallet were together, I would go to the next steps, and then I would get to using what you're referring to as the wet cloth. But I'm not going to do that yet, because I still have to account for these side edges. There's going to have to be a little bit of blending on these corners here. So I don't want to put any kind of wax or finishes or really finish these edges just yet. I'll do that when the wall is all together. But the wet cloth, the wax, goes on at the very final steps. When everything is good, when I look at it and say, yep, it's good, I'm not putting any more paint on it. Only then do I put wax on it. But I will show you what I do before that. There is another step in between that. These are your isopropyl alcohol pads. And because these paints are solvent-based, they can be reactivated by just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. So if you have sanding marks or brush strokes or things like that that you're not happy with in your paint, even after buffing it, give it a quick swipe of alcohol. Once it kind of off-gases, you want to let it set up a little bit. You can lightly go back over with your dry cloth, buff it again. That'll give you a really nice smooth sheen. I use Columbus Mill wax, but you could use any kind of paraffin or beeswax would be fine. I like the Columbus wax because it's high gloss. And we'll use the rest of that alcohol to clean off our fingers. Those edges are done. Right. There's our two edges there, and you can see by turning there we get a nice, looking at the reflections is what you want to do. You can see we get a nice, consistent, smooth reflection in that. So not bad. Not bad for just a little bit of work. Now, we need to talk about joining these two pieces together. We need to actually make the wallet. I'm going to, as I mentioned before, now that I have the final true dimensions of this interior, I'm going to round the corners off and punch the holes in it. And then I'll lay it over top the outer and punch the holes again. And I do that because that gives me a very consistent, clean back stitch, or clean exterior stitch. It lessens the amount of leather you're punching through at any given time, and makes the whole process a little easier if it does take a little bit longer. But not that much longer, I find. One of the only downsides to working with Delaro is the texture is so great that it's hard to see marks for stitch lines. Working so well, it's actually eating me out of the shop. Good close look at that. Make sure it's all lined up. It is. I like the look of it. Oh. Okay. We're now ready to glue this, at least on one side. Well, we're not quite ready. We still have to scuff this a little bit. I think what we'll do, I think I will show how I glue these together, and then I think I'll call it a day, because there's just not a whole lot to see with me sitting here stitching it. Test fit here. Like the way it looks. Got a mark here on the bottom where that card slot terminates. Same for the other side while we have this free. This is actually a really good indicator of kind of extra length that is needed to make bifolds work. So part goes out real quick for you so you can see. You can compare the difference between the gap here versus the gap on the inside. You can see we're about almost an extra ½ inch of space goes into the exterior than it does on the interior. This is covering the same gap, but this is how much extra width you need to actually be able to make that fold and close easily. And that's tricky to think about when you're designing these for the first time if you don't have a lot of experience doing so. It's kind of awkward to figure out. Say we're ready to go. Everything is prepped here. Yeah, we can start gluing this. Got it. Hang on. My clamps took a ride. I'm going to grab a single needle here. Remember how I talked about indexing where these fit with that top stitch line? We're going to do it again. So we're going to fit a needle through there, through that stitch line. We're going to come back to that in a second here. Get our glue down. Need to sneeze. Come on. Ugh. All right. You'll note I'm not being shy with my glue here. I'm being quite generous with it. This is a difficult spot. There's a lot of tension that this has to fight through the entire lifespan of the wallet, not just now. So I'm going to clamp it in place with a lot of glue in there. That really must hold together. Now, taking our needle, stick it through the corresponding hole here. That's going to hold those together. We can use that to hold that together at the top where it's most important that it fit. Clamp on it for now. Do the same down here. Lines we made earlier. Here. Working down the line, fitting that edge together. Sometimes it requires a little bit of twisting to get those bottom edges to line up exactly. That's okay. Not going to matter once it's all put together and stitched. Working down that line, putting clamps on there. You want to see the glue come out of the edge. Go. That's going to hold that together. Once we have that in place, we can go ahead and remove that needle there so it can lay flat. Now, some people will say, "Oh my God, no! You should never, never put clamps on your leather. Oh, never do that. That's all bunk. Doesn't matter. At least doing it this way doesn't matter." You have to remember, once this is clipped together, any marks that are left here, number one, are going to be very hard to notice against the marks that are already in the leather from the Delaro stamping. And number two, I'm clamping it on the stitch line, so the stitch line will tension and flex that area, and then the stitches will also hide any marks that are there. So at this point, it is far more beneficial to get this tension on this glue line than worrying about any potential marks that it may leave. And my understanding, my knowledge from having done this many, many times is that when I take these clamps off there, you will never be able to tell that they were ever there. So give it a second and wait here. We're going to give this about pull the timer back up. Give that a minute on the timer there just to let that glue set. It really does not take long with this Sewa water-based glue. It's pretty quick to set. Give it that just to be on the safe side there. Birds are really having a good time there on the feeder. If you had an edge delaminate, just glue it back together. When you're stitching it and when you're punching holes, it's not uncommon to get a little bit of delamination here and there. That's the time when you want to identify that and you can re-glue it. So it's much easier to fix that while the wallet is still being put together than when after it's finished. That's been a minute there. That's a bummer, Tom, but you should still be able to salvage that. There. You can see on that edge there we've had a little bit of glue come through. Good. That means we've got nice tension on it and that we have glue all the way out to that edge. Now, funnily enough, as I mentioned, we're gonna punch holes through this, so we'll probably delaminate it a little bit here and there, but again, not to worry, easy to solve right now. I'm gonna go with a smaller punch to start here. My neighbor's out walking. Start with the five tooth. there, coming through there, and we get a nice, clean, straight stitch through that. Because it's only punching through this outermost edge here. It's only punching through that thick of a piece there, rather than this whole thick edge there. And it's got the pre-made holes to follow as a guide. You're not trying to fight it, you're not trying to line it up, you're just going through the thickest part of the leather, which has already got holes in it, into the thinnest part of the wall on the outside there. Quite easy. Like I said, it takes a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra figuring to get to that point, but I find that it gives a very, very consistent exterior stitch. So far, our glue is holding very nicely, despite me punching through it and doing a lot of flexing to it. Now, here's one other reason I punch with these pieces together. There are some folks who will punch them truly separately, where they'll punch the interior and punch the exterior before they're put together. I don't like to do that. And here's why. Because you'll note that even with all the care we took to glue, all the care we took with trimming and aligning and everything like that, we've still got a little bit of a trapezoidal shape. I somehow cut a small angle on this outside edge there. That's okay. It doesn't matter. We followed this stitch line in here, so this line on the outside corresponds to the line on the inside. So when we trim this away flush into a perfect, rectangle shape, that stitch line is still going to be good. If we had punched that stitch line according to this edge, it would be different to this one, and we would not be able to trim it down shorter. If we trimmed it down, we'd be coming very, very close to that stitch line there. We've avoided doing that. We've given ourselves an out. We've given ourselves one more chance to make up for any errors that we may have made that we didn't even realize, didn't even know we'd done that. Just kind of assumed that it could happen and taken accounts for it. That's one other reason why I do that. No matter how much care, no matter how much practice you put into it, you will always have some little bit of variance that you're not aware of and not intending for. And the skill, in my opinion, comes in planning for and accounting for that. Anybody can put together a wallet that's cut perfectly, but you don't always account for the idea that you may not cut it perfectly, even though, for all intents and purposes, it sure looks like it is. That little half a millimeter of difference doesn't matter much when they're apart, but when they're put together, it sure does. There. I think, like I said, I'm going to punch these holes and call it a day. I'd say if you have any questions about anything we did here, now would be the time to ask it, because I'm going to shut the stream off in a couple minutes here. About 2 or 3 minutes. As always, I thank you for joining me. Again, apologies for not being as consistent this time of year. I'm just kind of trying to work through my orders and keep working as quickly as I can. So I realized I was a bit less talkative this time, and I worked a little quicker. Again, just trying to get my work done. But I'm glad you joined me. I can't say 100% for sure that we'll be streaming again next week, but I'll try if I have enough time. I don't have anything complicated going on. If you don't see a stream next week, it'll be the week afterwards, so just bear with me as I keep working here. Gonna have to be gentle with this because this is very stiff, so it doesn't want to naturally fold just yet. Actually, what I'm gonna do, here's one other thing I'm gonna do, which is a little different. Take that single needle, push it through the other side here. Line this up. Line up that edge, and I'm going to mark with my tines there. I've marked exactly where this edge lines up. go as far as actually driving that through, punching those holes. I know that when I bridge this gap here with the stitch line, it will line up. I'll be able to account for exactly where that stitch hole needs to go, and if I need to fudge anything different, I'm fudging it in a place that is easier to do rather than a difficult spot, right up against where this card slot pocket starts. But in the end, that lines up just perfectly as is. So, no need to do anything different. Which is how I always like it. Like it when everything just works. So, that's all ready to stitch. There we have it. We made this outer today, which, good golly, look at that. That is just a magnificent piece of alligator. Breaks my heart to cut it, but makes me happy to see it get used like this. We have cut it, trimmed it, creased it, stitched it, painted it, punched it, and glued it. It is ready to be stitched to this side here. Last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hammer these holes closed before I stitch them. That's 2 wallet pieces ready to become a wallet. I look forward to taking pictures of this one. That texture is going to be real fun to photograph. I look forward to that. That's going to be nice to cast a little bit of shadow on. See, just right there. You don't want to highlight those high spots too much, but just enough to let you know that they're there. And get that little bit of shadow cast on them. That's going to be handsome. That's going to be real pretty. I think, like I said, we're going to call it a day here. I'm glad you guys joined me. Tom, I'm glad you were here. I appreciate the conversation there. I'll catch you in the Discord there. So, any final questions, go ahead and leave them in chat. Send me an email. Get me on Instagram or in Discord. And as always, thank you guys for coming along, and we'll see you next time. Have a good day.